So I'm interested in sports. I've always just been a fan of certain sports. Some I'm not really don't like watching, but there's others that I do, and I think sports through the lens of teamwork and coaching. I remember watching there's a documentary, I think it's on Netflix, maybe called The Last Dance, and it's about a very successful basketball team, the Chicago Bulls, when they were at their prime, and how were they so good. It was very interesting to watch because you got to see a fairly small team. Basketball's teams of five on the field, and obviously there's subs that come in, but only ever five on the field, and the coach. And these players work together to attempt to, you know, score more baskets, actually get more points. Those might be different things because of the difference between a 2-point shot and a 3-point shot. But you're trying to get more points than the other team. And I find sports to be fascinating, especially team sports, because they take a team of people, a group of individuals, and force them to collaborate really effectively in a very dynamic environment. And coaches are watching this, and players on the field are watching this and observing and being a part of it. And you have different leadership roles that different people play. And I was fascinated by the Chicago Bulls coach, I think it's Phil Jackson, and how he talked about relating to the players and how he helped them pull together and the unexpected things he did. So anyway, I like sports. I like thinking about the team collaborating in a dynamic environment. I think it actually maps more than we realize to something like game development, even though there's not a direct adversary, like an opposing team there. There are a million other teams, and they're all trying to figure out how their team can win, can exploit the other team's weaknesses and stuff like that. We do that in game dev as well. So we have that same vibe. We're trying to figure out how to be the best game in a genre, how to draw all the players in, how to exploit the weaknesses when another game isn't taking care of a player need. How do we take care of it instead? So anyway, I watched a video recently. It was about the entanglement idea, which is how do we actually know if a player is good? We've seen instances in sports, especially with larger teams like soccer and football, where a player who seems to be just amazing goes from a team where they're crushing it to it seems like a better team. And suddenly they start struggling. And maybe the opponents are pretty much the same and a bunch of other stuff, but they go and they move to a different team and they can't seem to find a role. And you could say, well, there's stylistic differences and this and that and the other. And I think there's truth in that. But one of the things that it really points to, because you see this enough, it points to this idea that anybody's individual performance is a consequence of everything around them, everybody around them, the coach, the system, the doctors, the front office staff. Like there's all this stuff that goes into what might make a successful player at any given moment. And you have the reverse happen as well. You have a player that's really struggling, and everybody's like, that player's not very good, or maybe they used to be good, but now they're not. They're not stepping up. They're not, when in international football, they're not scoring goals, or in other sports, they're not blocking well, or whatever it might be. And they go to somewhere else, and they start doing really well, and they start, performing in ways that no one would have expected. Why? What happened? Was it just all their own growth and development? Probably not. It probably had to do with the people around them, the team around them. And this is a very interesting thing to see play out as somebody who thinks about teamwork and collaboration, because I think we also in game development can get into our heads this idea that there is a best version of an artist or an engineer or something, and that if you just have the best people, a lot of people talk about getting the right people on the bus, and there's value in that. I agree with that. But if you put the right people on the bus and no one supports them, or they don't fit with the system, or you build a system that is almost too customized to them but doesn't get you towards the goal, there's a whole bunch of ways this can go wrong. You can actually hamstring your team. You can hamstring those best engineers, and what you discover is that sometimes less well-known, less well-regarded, less experienced developers may outperform inside of a particular system those who seem to be much better based on pedigree and background. And I think game development needs to think about this more, this idea of entanglement. So Anyway, that's something I've been thinking about a lot. We tend to take teams and look at individuals and say, well, that person's really great. And sometimes we have high functioning teams and we think, well, everybody on that high functioning team is really great. How else could it be a high functioning team? And I've seen this happen more than once, where we split up that team because maybe they finished what they were doing, or maybe someone thought, well, we've got all these high performers, let's move them to other teams so they can add value in all these other places, and it doesn't work out. Sometimes somebody's still effective in a different environment, but usually the overall outcome of where they end up is worse than when they were all together, because some of what made them successful was that they brought something together as a group that allowed them to be the whole to be more than the sum of the parts. And when we ignore this reality, when we ignore the idea of entanglement, I think we inappropriately evaluate people and teams, and we misunderstand what's going on, and we think we've identified who our top talent is, and we don't actually know, because perhaps your top talent is stuck in a dysfunctional team, and you never know. It's like, how could you even work that out? All of it points to me to this idea that whenever you see a problem and it seems to be something that relates to an individual, the right thing to do is not to, well, I just need a different individual. The first thing should always be, what's wrong in the system? What is happening in the system that's causing this to happen? I'm not saying it's not ever the person. Sometimes it is. I think that's true as well. But the problem is, if you always jump to the person being the problem, then you're going to constantly be swatting people who may be more victims of the system that they're in. And, I'm the first one to say, hey, we've got to take individual accountability. You need to try to figure out how to do a good job wherever you are, regardless of your role, discipline, experience. You need to try to do your best. But I also know that sometimes the system is stronger than the individual in some environments in game development. And the best person can struggle. And you don't have to have, obviously, when you have like toxic politics going on, it's more obvious, but you don't have to have that. It could just be simple dysfunction, and it could be bad tools, and it could be all sorts of things. And if we don't resolve those underlying issues, it will not allow us to have a successful team, even if we have all the best people. So perhaps the outcome of this sort of entanglement theory is be wary of who you hold as like, these are the best people, because it may be that they've happened to come together, but you don't know that they would still be the best people if they went to different teams, and you don't exactly know why they're the best team now. There's theories, you might have better or worse ideas. There's people who have studied this stuff and could probably give some insight into it. But I have found in my experience, anecdotal as it may be, that most of the time when people rationalize this, they rationalize in hindsight. It's, it's a hindsight is 20/20 thing. They can look at the situation, they can say, well, look at this and look at this and look at this. But imagine a different team, a different environment that might have some of those same factors, and yet the team is really struggling, because that's something that's out there. So we can rationalize it once it's there. And a lot of people say, like, well, obviously that works really well. But it may be that if you started from scratch, you couldn't have predicted it to happen. And I think that's the interesting thing. That's what's interesting about, sports like international football or American football with like larger teams, rugby probably similar. Even the best scouts, even the best front offices, the best managers trying to find the best players, our guesses are not really great. Our ability to correlate past performance with future performance once the system is shifted is not as strong as it could be. Yes, there are players that are clearly better than other players in some way, shape, or form, and that might be regardless of system. But actual performance, you just can't predict up front once you bring that group of people together. And that's what we do in game dev over and over. We bring the group of people together. So anyway, thinking about entanglement, thinking about how that relates to individuals on teams and them being effective. With that, we'll close down the stream. Thanks if you ever watch this later. Appreciate you. And until next week. Cheers.